I want to move to another issue. We've talked about drug use before, Chris, you and I, but statistics at New South Wales schools have reported doubling in drug use. Now, I'm just waiting for someone to say, well, let's just give up the race to stop kids using drugs. If they're using it in the school, why don't we have a whole use drugs safely subject on the curriculum? Why don't we teach them how to shoot up properly?
Yeah, all the supporters of pill testing will say something similar, and you'll read the stories tomorrow. You're exactly right. You've jumped ahead of them. You'll read those stories tomorrow. But I don't know whether this is such a big alarm. For a start, I know that schools and teachers are far more proactive in determining whether students have got drugs and where they're taking the drugs and where they're getting the drugs. A lot better than what they used to do in my day, when it was still happening, but it was off, out of bounds. It was an issue that teachers and schools didn't tackle. I think there's a little bit more reporting going on, and I think if you look at what's happening in the general community, there's an uptake in drug taking, sadly. I don't think it's much of a cause for concern as long as we find out who is dealing in the drugs in a schoolyard and we're doing something about stopping that. I think that's got to be a good thing, the fact that that many are being detected.
Yeah, it's not just young people though, Justin, too. You know, if parents have been taking drugs and suddenly they have young people, they can hardly, you know, complain and ground their kids if their kids start taking drugs. I mean, are we breeding a whole second generation now of people that think illicit drugs can be used safely and recreationally, and you can still hold down a job and a career?
Yeah, perhaps, and I agree with Chris. I think it links in with the pill testing. I think it's a big part of it, because when you start suggesting, hey, listen, it's not such a bad thing to pop a couple of ecstasy tablets and go out for the night, that's okay, and hey, it's perhaps not a bad thing for us to legalise marijuana or maybe even harder drugs. When you start talking that way, this is the problem with it, is perhaps some people could take drugs and they lead a relatively normal life, but it buggers up a large amount of the population. And when you tell kids, when you give them a green light and say, hey, the government doesn't actually think it's as bad as what we thought before, that really sends a signal to them that, hey, you know, it might be a little bit naughty, but, you know, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. We probably need to get back to some of these campaigns to tell people just how destructive it really is, how much it can really destroy lives, and ditch all this crap about pill testing.
Yeah, that's interesting, that last point, Justin. Can I just raise that? I wonder whether there's a correlation between the amount of drugs that are being used in the school precinct and the impact that's having on kids taking their lives. It would not surprise me. I haven't got any literature to suggest that. All I know that both drug taking is up and so is suicide in a school context.
When you cannot talk about mental health usually without linking it to some form of either it be an addiction or a taking of drugs. I mean, the two things do go hand in hand.
Well, there's a very clear correlation, particularly with young men in cannabis and increased rates of schizophrenia and susceptibility, if there is a susceptibility already being exacerbated by cannabis use. I mean, these are some of the issues. You're not allowed to talk about them, though. I look at the issue in Victoria. The AMBOs have just come out saying that they support a regime of pill testing. Now, the Premier has said, I'm not interested in pill testing at this time. Now, this is the same Premier, the government, the Labor government down there, that went to an election promising that they would not have a heroin injecting room. Well, promptly after the election, Chris, they announced that they'd have a heroin injecting room trial. They call it a trial, to get around the lie that they weren't going to have it. Now, that trial did 12 months. 60,000 hits were administered in this area in Richmond that has decimated house values and local businesses. And just very quietly in the middle of the year, that trial was rolled over and doubled.
We've already had pill testing being used in a trial in the ACT where you'd expect it to occur. Victoria will absolutely go down the same route. And while they're saying, oh, there have been trials around the world that have proven that you can stop people taking a drug that has proved to be bad for them, all that rubbish that we're hearing, it is just total and utter rubbish. What we haven't heard, or what we haven't got, is the research that says, what will a regime of normality to drugs do to those kids who are never going to take drugs in the first place? All the tens of thousands of kids in this country, in this state, or this country that weren't going to touch drugs. If you normalise it, don't tell me that a large percentage...
Going to come their way.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Correct.
And of course we know from plenty of medical research at the coalface in emergency rooms and other places, Justin, the abuse, the violence, the physical assaults that our medicos face, particularly in relation to ICE. Why on earth would we go down this path?
Look, yeah, absolutely, I agree. I don't know if the Victorian government is going to do it. I'm probably a little bit more of an optimist. I really hope they don't. And the ambulance union, I think the plan that they had, I think their heart was in the right place. I don't agree with it, but their plan was to, if the police managed to get some pills, some ecstasy tablets, they test it and then they inform everyone if they were safe or not. So it's sort of a halfway plan. I still don't like it. I still don't think it's going to work, and I still don't think it's going to save any lives.
All right, gentlemen, I have to leave it there.